selecting the icon interpretation, the lower bottom of your screen. You choose the language and silence original audio. My name is Barbara. I work for the Brazilian network, RedETSA. They work with the management and for technology with the Ministry of Health. I work with RedETSA. I will thank you for your participation. That we work also with RedETSA, the America's Network for Technology in Health Care. We have a moderator, Sebastián García, that will give a briefing presentation, about 10 minutes, and will follow by the presentations, where we go in depth with the subjects. Each one will have about 30 minutes to present. I'll ask you all to silence your microphones during the presentation. At the end, you'll be able to raise your hand and make any sort of comment you wish. Again, you can ask questions in English, Portuguese, or Spanish. You can write in any of those 3 languages your questions in the chat, and we will read in your language. I'll invite Alexandra Engrupe, Francisco Cacavo, that represents RedETSA, and then we'll have the manager for technology with the Ministry of Health.
Thank you, Barbara. Good afternoon to all. It is a pleasure to be here representing Alexandre and the Secretariat of RedETSA here in OPS. Pajo, I see that we have many colleagues and friends joining us. I would like to thank all the members of RedETSA and RedETSA who are connecting, all the presenters, also Brigitte, Carisi, Sebastián García Martí, who will be our moderator, and Maleng Holman and Stephen Rate, who have actively worked in the organization of the webinar. This is webinar 33, and as Barbara said, it's an initiative, a joint initiative with RedETSA. For us, it's very special. It's the first joint initiative, and it's part of a broader work scheme for this year and for next year, including many activities that incorporating reports from the IBISA network, methodological manual, and many other activities. For us, it's very important to be able to work jointly, as we've always done, with the Ministry of Health of Brazil, and in this case, more specifically, with RedETSA. As you all know, this webinar and the next few webinars will be on RedETSA's webpage. You can find it there, as well as former webinars. Let me now express my gratitude for your participation and Vania for her support. Let me give the floor now to Vania.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Francisco. I thank you for inviting me to participate. This webinar is kind of new for us. This is great to help us improve and also to help us reevaluate technology and also AI, artificial intelligence. This is all new for us in Brazil. I'm not sure how the other countries are dealing with it, but we have some improvement to do in Brazil. I noticed that we have a lot of people participating, about 140 participants on Zoom. We have few participants from Brazil. My department has worked with about 80 institutions with health technology assessment. We work at hospitals, universities. And this is a great opportunity that we can work together, and we can share information. And it's great to see so many colleagues from the Americas. I thank you all. I believe this is first of many other opportunities. We have a few webinars in Brazil with the RedETSA. We are planning also with Alexandre and Francisco, many others. We work with RedETSA and RedETSA. We're planning some meetings in Brazil around November. And it will be a great opportunity to see you all in person. So we'll start. And I thank you again. And see what we can do and what we can implement in my country. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you, Vania. Thank you, Francisco. I will invite Sebastián to initiate the webinar. He's a doctor, and he also has a master with the University of Buenos Aires. He's also coordinator for the HTA and also the Institute, ICS, where he coordinates technology economic evaluations. He includes big data, artificial intelligence. He's also a researcher with the Cochrane Center and the National Council in Argentina, CONICET. He's working many projects to evaluate health technology and assessment. He has worked with many countries in the region, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and among others. Sebastián, I'll give you the floor. You can start.
Gracias, Bárbara.
Thank you, Barbara. Hello, it's a pleasure to be here in this first joint webinar between RedETSA and RedETSA. Our issue today is artificial intelligence. It's something that we've seen in movies and the sensation that robots will conquer the world, the possibility that we'll be doing things that may be boring for human beings or may be very difficult to undertake. In the world of the assessment of health technologies, there are three applications of artificial intelligence. Two have to do with the generation of information, and a third one has to do with the technologies that need to be assessed. As to the generation of information, for some time now, we've seen the application of artificial intelligence to summarize information associated to a systematic review, for screening, for extraction. All of us who've participated in systematic reviews, we know that it's very difficult to do all the screening of articles that will later be included and then extract the data that will be included in the systematic review. And we all feel that in the screening and extraction, it's not that there's great knowledge applied, or basically there's tons of information that need to be summarized. When this screening and extraction is done, then we have the analysis where you feel more useful. Therefore, the use of AI could facilitate the screening and data extraction. It would be marvelous. My second, um, the second point where AI could be useful for the generation of information is when we analyze very large databases. Currently, and for a few years, this year and last year, I would say, what is called real world dividends became even more important. The real world dividends means the use of information that was not collected with the specific research end to conduct different types of studies. Sometimes these databases that were generated and they were not generated with a specific information um, objective. For example, financiers for very large social works, the wearables. I think somebody has an open microphone and it's interfering. So the wearables, what we know as the exercise bands and smart watches, all of that eh, accumulates data, an enormous amount of data, and that data is facilitated by the use of IA. The generation of algorithms used by artificial intelligence needs the study of very large databases. Brigitte will be explaining in her presentation to generate the algorithms of AI, you need to process tons of information. Maybe you know the photograph recognition. For example, you have many photos in your phone, and if the phone says, this is my son, the software tries to recognize all the photographs where your son is. But when you start telling the phone, this is my son, so the algorithm doesn't learn if you have only one photograph, but if you have 15, then the algorithm will learn to recognize my son. So the generation of algorithms also means that you need tons of information scanned. Those are the two uses of AI for the generation of information, and the more specific use of systematic review or the analysis of very large databases for real world evidence. But then in the assessment of health technologies, you need to assess a technology that uses AI. And the devices make it more difficult when you have to do an assessment than a drug. But sometimes those devices have inside an algorithm for analysis. So you can have two different devices. Let's imagine one to analyze images or for electrocardiograms or so devices that can guide surgical procedures, and these devices have an analysis algorithm in them. And these algorithms include the use of what we call AI. As if we have to assess an analysis technique that includes an algorithm of AI, the analysis of those algorithms is a technology in itself with challenges when you have to do the assessment of health technology. We're going to have two presentations today, one by Brigitte Côté and the other one by Carisi Polanczyk. I am going to introduce both. Brigitte will talk more generally about artificial intelligence, and then she will explain a specific application and screening of diabetic retinopathy, and Carisi will talk about the use of AI with specific applications in Brazil. Brigitte is a doctor from the University of Montreal. She is a specialist in public health and preventive medicine. She was a consultant in several projects in Latin America during the last decades. She was a consultant for the assessment of the National Institute of Excellence in Health from Quebec in Canada. She worked in the technologies that potentially can be disruptive, like the ones we were mentioning in artificial intelligence. And she's part of an initiative in the Montreal University Hospital Center that trains people that can facilitate the introduction of AI in the hospital setting. Carisi Polanczyk is also a graduate from the University of Rio Grande do Sul. She has a residence in cardiology and a master's and a PhD in the same area. She teaches in the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. She is a researcher of the National Technological Committee. She directs the cardiology department of Molinos de Viento, and also she works in the assessment of health technologies and main researcher of the Center of AI for Health, researching systems and health management, as well as personalized medicine. It will be a pleasure then to have both presentations, Brigitte and Carisis, and then later we'll be able to talk, ask questions, and talk about this issue, which is really very interesting. Brigitte, you begin with the first presentation then. It's your volume is very low, Brigitte. We do not hear, we cannot hear what she says. The interpreters do not hear what she's saying. It's better now, better now. It could be my network. I am going to share my presentation. I don't know if you can see it. Yes, we can see it. I would like to thank you all, RedETSA and RedETSA, for the invitation to make this presentation, which is a passion for me, integration of AI in the assessment of health technologies. I will give you an overview about artificial intelligence for the assessment agencies and the tools that are helping us in the assessment. An example also of diabetic retinopathy and the challenges we face. And then I will refer to the literature with the tools. I have no conflict of interest. My interest in AI began in the last few years personally, and then I realized that in the health system there was being used in hospitals. Montreal is a context where AI is very active. We have an Institute of Artificial Intelligence, which is recognized all over the world. We also have universities where this issue is this seen, and we began looking at the innovations, and I became interested in this, in the CHUM, the Center for Artificial Intelligence, to integrate it in hospitals, because I'm a doctor. So I am not in a somebody who knows a lot of computers. I'm a doctor who's interested in the issue, and that's what I will be talking about. What is AI? There are many definitions. Some people say it imitates human intelligence because of it reasoning, the adaptation of information, and it's also a discipline and a method, and is not something that is from otherworldly. It's based on math. I'm not a math geek, but I'm going to try and show how, through interdisciplinary efforts, we can participate in this adventure. AI has many subfields. We talk about machine learning, the convolutional neuronal networks, many methodologies, many languages, NLP. So there is a breadth of methods based on algorithms, and algorithms are based on mathematics. They exist for thousands of years. It comes from the Greek. The word algorithm comes from the 9th century. So it's not new, but the computers and the use we make of it is new. I am going to show you some in these slides, a deep dive, so we understand the algorithm, see what it means, not so much to reproduce it. It seems it would be easy to learn to code and write and understand the different languages, but this process of algorithms, for us who do the evaluation, is fundamental. There are two types of algorithms, explicit and implicit. Two types of data we will be working with. Sebastián talked about photographs and images, and they can be structured or non-structured. There's also the operations can be complex or simpler. They can take less space in the computer or more. Let me give you examples of what we call explicit algorithms. It's like a decision trees. Somebody receives the criteria and the algorithm will define the outcomes, like in a decision tree. Where things become more complicated is when you have an implicit algorithm. The database is in the computer, the criteria will be identified to reach the outcome. For example, an algorithm that detects undesired emails. So here's all my emails. That's the data. And if I want to structure the data, I can give it the characteristics of each data, the metadata. That's like labeling a very large database so that AI can work. It's a structured data. And when you start working with a database, you teach it to recognize an image. And there's a story when you want to write a code to recognize cows. Here, all the cows are grazing, and the training is done with these images. And so when later you try to validate with cows on the beach, there is a bias and it won't be recognized. So that is the work of an algorithm that's implicit. There's a black box and you don't know the criteria that will give the algorithm will give the outcome with. The black box is important because it gives the confidence for the health professional that wants to understand the process. And so that's what the black box does. Why is it important to use AI in the assessment of technology? Because it's everywhere. It's in diagnostics, in all care, but also logistics of the hospitals, and also in research, in clinical evaluation. And now we see that AI is very disruptive. What does it mean? That there are many technologies that come into the market, but some, because of the cost or their benefit, they could mean that it cannot be distributed to everybody, and disruptive technologies are assessed annually, and you see that AI is a part of these disruptive technologies.
That's why it's so important for us, especially in MRI scanning. Now, within the context of the pandemic, AI has become that much more important. Here we speak of 4 different applications, which there's been a quick acceleration of its use. AI used in epidemiology, in therapeutics as well. Not so much discovering new treatments, but discovering molecules, for example, during COVID, predictive modeling, clinical research. And social sciences, contact tracing, geolocalization-based contact tracing. That was a one thing that AI was applied to in large scale. It was at the beginning of 2021 when INESS started in a collaborative project with experts on modeling rather. And this was done during the pandemic in a 2-part approach. First, predictions about what the evolution of the pandemic would be in Quebec, using publicly available information from hospitals in Montreal. We used to get data 3 years after the fact, and now we're getting it pretty much in real time. After we had this data, we could forecast what resources, how many resources would be necessary. Next week, methodologically speaking, there were many challenges associated with predictive models. This was the Pasteur method. You can see the comparison between or in France, the number of cases, a green line, each green line is a model. There are different models. I'm not going to mention all of them. Vector model, for example. Now here we have the median of models. And these are the true cases that we looked at after the fact. Now, all of this data is from the prior 6 months, but when you have a new variant, we see the dispersion in predictions among the different models. So it was very important to us and for decision makers to have models, but adjustments had to be made working in collaboration with university experts and then civilians in the process of integrating new information into these models based on projections of the number of cases. We could see what the usage trajectory was, whether hospitals were overburdened or not. An estimate of resource demands. We look at the people going to intensive care units. Again, this data was received weekly, and that enabled us to enhance our predictions. Now, there's a tool. This was a startup in Montreal working with CHUM, C-H-U-M. Scientific journal articles were read by this AI, extracting all of the information. And this was done with the purpose of simplifying and accelerating extraction. That's what this AI application was, in order to organize trustworthy, reliable knowledge and facilitate the navigation through that knowledge. And this all taken from a list of articles and even gray literature. I do think this is going to be a very useful tool in the future. Some adjustments are going to have to be made to it. Let's take a look at some of the challenges when we assess the different technologies available. It's necessary to start with large and diversifying databases of information to facilitate training the AI according to the variability. And we can use AI to actually assess the effectiveness of technology. Now, first you do an assessment to see whether this information is going to be helpful to healthcare professionals. Studies that compare the reading of images by individuals compared to AI. This part isn't really very well developed. But in this case, what we've seen is that there are an increasing number of tools that enable us to assess the different AI applications. A workshop was held yesterday that was interactive in enabling students to work on their own models. It was also based on Chum, this with the collaboration of a host of universities. And they put together a checklist of what needs to be borne in mind and evaluated when AI is using or drawing from an article. There are many tools and much literature has been written about this. I want to talk a little bit about my own experience as these problems arose. Now, this was taken from an article written in 2021 about diabetes. There was a hospital in the city of Chum that was implementing and developing with a startup the capacity to read the images taken of the back of the eye, the retina. Now, there is no screening program of that nature yet, so that is what made this project so important. There are many new products emerging in the market, so we had to do a market analysis first and also an analysis of literature to see whether there have been articles published on this subject matter. Now, literature sometimes it takes a long time to be published, so that doesn't necessarily give you state of the art. There is much open source information available. I'm going to talk a little bit about all of the different technological challenges. Value added. So first, technology, some clinical aspects, organizational aspects, and value added. Now, on technology, we have to look at the whole learning process. The purpose of this program is for the purpose of screening. There aren't very many retinologists. To detect retinopathies, to be able to recognize different types, distinguish between different types of pathologies, edema, or macular degeneration. And then that makes it possible to refer patients to the right specialist early on. We had some data that had been gathered, developed in hospitals. It wasn't a process that had been thoroughly developed. It was only in its third month. Now, the criteria to ensure that AI would be effective, that it be, number one, a mature process, ripe for it to be rolled out, that it be adaptable to different types of data, different types of images, tomographies or numeric chambers, cameras, interoperable, and the evaluation parameters or assessment parameters rather, are that they can apply to real context, that the results are explainable. There has to be a certain degree of sensitivity included and specificity. Is a given percentage of illegible images. Now here, this is just to give you an overview, comparative of the different systems, what countries, how the analysis is being done, the standardization of these different methodologies, if this is a whole platform or if it's just a localized system, the type of learning, is it supervised? Oftentimes, what we see is a lack of data, how the data is gathered, how many people were trained. Here we have 7,000 images, a case in Spain, across 1,000 patients, and that helps to avoid biases being absorbed by the AI system. What is the clinical aspect? The most important thing was to see that the third level hospital where this training is being done, that would be one thing. If it's for an entire province, pathologies, are we only talking about retinopathy or other things as well? And what is the population that is likely to benefit from this? Some ethical considerations, security, privacy, safety and privacy, through all of the process levels. There are many people in Canada who have diabetes and they don't necessarily have access. And so we have to think about ensuring that greater access be granted. Governance. Now, this is something that can be handled at the province level of the province, but ultimately it is of international scope. You have the matter of storage of data, ensuring data is made anonymous. This all has to do with data security, the legal framework as well. In the US and Europe, are cases in point. So there are many places that are impacted patients, clinics, and new personnel, new staff has to be up to speed on this technology, making sure that there's an interdisciplinary approach. Now, this was applied and analyzed in two different contexts, real ones in different countries. Currently, this has not yet been done in Quebec, as there was a limited amount of data. A third level hospital and the costs that would entail, governance. This is a tool that was created by Canada Health InfoWay, which might be useful processes to ensure proper governance, a governance framework. That might be something you'll find interesting or worthwhile. At the end of the program in Quebec, it was thought that this technology is very complex. And it's thought that it's a bit premature at this stage to try to graduate from the current model being used and this AI-based model. It's not quite ready yet. Now, by way of background literature, there are some quotes that we found interesting. One talks about how this will be evaluated. A lot of times the focus is only on cost savings and not on health outcomes. Much work still has to be done to make this a model that could be applied broadly. My final thought is that this is very interesting, but it is a destructive technology. So it's very important for us to do all of the groundwork, preliminary work first. Ultimately, AI is going to bring about many changes in the field and among professionals. If you think that the healthcare workers of the future, when AI is going to be more prevalent, are still in grade school, but where we stand right now in 2022, in Quebec, we have this community of practice created by SHUM, the School of Artificial Intelligence, working with computer experts on real projects. Now, in training or education, the skills background necessary. Here's a published article on that. So I do think that it's very important for us to to take part in this process that ultimately will apply greater use of AI in health with real benefits to be reaped. Everyone, all of the stakeholders have to be part of this process, which should be collaborative. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Brigitte, for that presentation. We're going to save the questions for the end. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Carisi, si te parece, comenzás vos con tu presentación.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon, everybody.
Muchas gracias, Carisi. Te dejo con la presentación.
Thank you very much. You have the floor, Carisi.
Só confirmar que vocês estão vendo o
Se
meu
escucha,
slide.
se
I just
escucha.
want to be sure that you can see my presentation very well. We hear and see you well. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank RedETSA and Rebrates, Bárbara, as well as Vania and colleagues, so that we can be a part of this event. And I admit that I saw the number of participants quickly rising as this meeting started. And it's impressive to see a meeting on a Friday afternoon, over 160 people joining. That means people are truly interested and involved in this activity. That's quite neat. Thank you, Brigitte, who spoke before me, because she has already laid out the groundwork in clarifying some concepts. And I was asked to speak about experiences or opportunities of how AI can be used in the process of assessing health technologies, what RedETSA, the European network, our Rebrates, how they work and how these networks can make use of these tools in order to improve their processes and eventually find interesting outcomes for the future. This is my waiver on conflict of interest. And now I would like to show you, for starters, some concepts that I believe everybody is very aware of. What is the assessment of health technologies? We use a very broad concept since 2020, which is referred to as the new definition, although it hasn't changed much. It is a multidisciplinary process in which we use multiple explicit methods to ascertain the value of a certain health technology through its various stages in its life cycle. So whoever it may be, whether it is a manager or a clinician, in order to ensure that the patient is treated as well as possible with equity, efficiency, and high quality. The entire process, all technologies, and we see that increasingly cover a very broad range of objects, so to speak, of categories, treatments, equipment, IT, support structures. Health technology is becoming broader and more complex. And as we look further, as we zoom in into the value of each technology, each category has deepened even further, whether they are safe, whether they're accurate and efficacious, and whether there is a good cost-benefit relationship. So typically, for years and decades, information is collected so that at some point, all of that data is put in perspective. Everything is assessed in order for us to come to a conclusion on whether a product should or should not be included in a health system. And where does AI fit in? What does it mean? And why should we use AI within this process that has been developing in the last 20, 30 years? And more specifically, considering standards and regulation in the last 10 years, artificial intelligence can truly serve as a tool to assist in the entire process. As Brigitte mentioned, there are multiple definitions of AI. It could be the use of algorithms or some sort of computing programming or mathematical programming that would allow for computers to become similar to human cognitive analysis of complex health data. These computational algorithms would approximate conclusions without direct assistance of humans. And just like Brigitte, I myself am a doctor. I am not a specialist in computer science. And we see that we are increasingly more partnering with specialists in computing. So going back to the concept of AI, we will not only be discussing artificial intelligence in the next few minutes, but rather data science, our ability to review data produced nowadays at higher volumes, whether they are unstructured data in our daily activities through using email and the internet in our personal interactions with all of these computing issues. And artificial intelligence in and of itself should be algorithms that allow that based on learning will bring us better and better results. Normally that happens in all sorts of data science uses. But when we refer to AI, basically we mean how could we automate data analysis so that it could take place more expeditiously, so that a machine could learn our way of thinking, the human way of thinking, so that we could reach the intended results. Certainly, there are multiple models. This is a very interesting article that was recently published, and it reviews possible modeling methods and topics that could be used to apply this type of data science and health, technology, economics. But I wanted to mention that it goes beyond AI. If we look into AI, we see that it has become a a type of technology in health. There are many areas in which it's already used, radiology, as Sebastián mentioned. A machine can be more assertive when looking at patterns as opposed to a human observing one pattern at a time. So in imaging and telemedicine, we see many attempts of using this technology to facilitate clinical decision-making. I'm sure you have heard of Watson, the Watson computer or the IBM computer in oncology. We heard from Brigitte the retinopathy diagnosis through AI as well, as an example. And in terms of imaging, it is one of the areas in which AI has advanced the most. These algorithms can detect patterns much more accurately than the human eye is able to. And we see also how information, vital signs can be collected on each individual that were not available in the past. And these are all sources of unstructured data, however, data that is nonetheless available and can be reached through these new tools. And the use of models, data-based models, have also been used in research. Traditionally, our research model for a clinical study has been to define a hypothesis based on a previous clinical research, carry out experiments, and then data analysis. Now we are evolving towards a model in which hypotheses are being generated based on information in various silos, and based on the available data, we then generate quicker and hopefully more accurate hypotheses, so they may be confirmed through traditional studies. However, today our goal is not to talk about AI as a technology, but rather as a tool in order to focus on multiple aspects related to health technology assessment specifically.
We have certain questions that we ask ourselves. If HTA works and what is the efficiency, we can also compare to other alternatives and see how effective it is. We also need to ask ourselves what is the preference from the patient and what the family prefers, because it involves also psychological and social aspects. And also, who could accept this kind of technology, could follow up with the results generated by technology. We need to find out also for how the results were processed in the first stages. We also have some examples. So the use of technology, even though we used to use it, and we need to take into consideration that a person who is trying to use this as proof and how it will gather data is much more complex. So our traditional pyramid, so when we talk about a study of cases, cohort studies, and when we talk about technology, it's not as simple. There are too many gray zones. So the models that need to be developed are extremely complex. And sometimes we don't have all the necessary information to build up these models. Sometimes we don't have a long-term information. We don't know the price and how much of the data will cost. This is a challenge for anybody that works with HTA. Two elements that I find extremely important as the use of artificial intelligence could eventually help us. One, the difference that we know that exists between the results, between the study in an ideal setting and with a selected population, Sometimes it's not part of a reality, the reality in our healthcare system. And we also have a daily basis data that sometimes is not represented well. And the process, the decision making, that generates a gap between efficiency and effectiveness. We need to look at the real data to do the decision-making process. This slide, for me, it's extremely interesting because we talk about the quantity of generated information. We need to put it in a perspective. We need to deal with uncertainties. We need to deal with our patients and our population. But we have a number of complex situations that need to be taken into account. We need to evaluate those. Some diseases are rare, and we may not be able to have a great number of patients to build up a database. Sometimes the population doesn't want to wait 3, 4, 5 years of follow-up to have a proper result. And we also have to take into account the elderly, that sometimes they don't have time to wait for it. This is a great challenge. And how could we look at the available data in different formattings and different models, but the decision-making process, it should be better and speed up. And also we should be able to do a follow-up with those data. So we're expecting great change in how the agencies can behave and restructure. This has been a great opportunity, and I include even my participation in the webinar today, where we have people from different countries, and we can hear what they're talking about, the use of AI in health technology assessment. And the perspective we have at this moment, it's positive. There are a lot of studies, a lot of authors talking about opportunities. And we also can use so many new techniques to speed up the process. I have some examples and what I've been able to identify and what we can use in our country, in our settings. First of all, the support in administrative process and HTA, we also can use in a systematic research, also use real-life data to improve the information. We also can take into account costs and how we can follow up, how we can process payment, and also participation and analysis of patients and society as well. Let me start with the first one. We have this expert from FDA. They were talking different initiatives on how they could qualify the process and how they could evaluate the drugs and approve it. So how could this process be automated? What kind of bioequivalence among drugs could be done? This is a mathematical model. It was done through a software. These can categorize documents. It can prepare data. It can analyze data. The software also can add the information in a spreadsheet according to what it comes from the manufacturer. And the evaluation can be much faster. because information is added in real lifetime. So they can regulate new products faster. Second is how it can help in clinical studies. We have more information, we have more experience in this realm. We have some applications that can be used. Many of those are already available. I added in the spreadsheet some links. IECS is the most used, but we have many others. Those systems are used with machine learning. We can analyze data based on original studies. We can also create a sequencing. We can have a sequence of keywords that can be established. With this, we can extract the relevant articles and what can contribute to information for a certain technology. This field of study has advanced a lot. We can identify important articles. And there are other studies that can test the possibility that predetermined algorithm based in different models. It could be Bayes theory and also Descartes. They can be used not only to select the articles, but also to help extracting relevant information. So we can do a systematic review if the population is adequate, and we can compare with the results. With this information, it can be done in a training, the model itself. We also realized there was a very good agreement that the use of these tools with a systematic review and it can be compared with professionals that use the traditional models. We can check the ratio between the analysis and also can compare with manual extraction. So that's a field that AI can bring a lot of benefits. Second point, the use of real-life data to build up information. There are so many possibilities. We can help build knowledge. When some technology may not be able to do a proper comparison, but we can also look at long-term the use of technology, how it will work. We can also compare data in real life, how the results has been achieved, how it can be used on a daily basis. There's a lot of experts all over the world interested in it. We have many other activities that we can go in depth and evaluate the data in real lifetime. We can also check in with our model since 2018, when this real-world evidence framework was released. What was the format and when the evidence could be accepted so we can apply it with technology? So far, it's restricted. It's not like any real-world evidence will be used and it can be used to approve the new technologies. But once it's structured and once it's been approved, the project, before the use information before the program, so there will be a reality. We've been talking a lot about this framework and how we can use real-world information to an analysis new technology. Here we have another example. It's an academic initiative. And I ask, could we
use non-randomized real-world evidence on a daily basis and produce the same information. In other words, what the authors have used, what kind of data. We had comparison between placebo and non-placebo, and also comparison population with all people that have been taken into Medicare, and we could select the same kind of individual that was under the same criteria. If it was randomized, example of a specific medication, we could compare the one that received this medication and the ones that did not. What happened to those people? So each study has a different amount of days. So we could compare. We could have the clinical assay in blue, compare with the one in the real life. You can see that the numbers are not the same. But the perspective of benefits with the use of technology, it was similar. It was not 100%, but it was close. And we're still debating it. So the clinical studies that we could reproduce, 8 were in the same line. The result could have been different in the relationship between technology benefit and the real life data did not agree with it. It did not show the same result with the randomized assay. This line of study use this kind of information to approve new technology. But what has been mostly accepted by the agencies is the concept of to produce a research, a project for research, and an analysis that will be done in parallel with a clinical study. And after we get a data from the compare with a control group with daily basis, that can be put into a prospective study. Once we compare, we can have a conclusion. We need a great number of patients to do so. Sometimes it may be difficult to do a randomized with placebo and usual therapy, in particular in oncology. Also, the real life data that has been offered by the agencies that are following up with what's been expected and what can be done after approval. And also, what is the relationship between the results? The data that are presented in this slide was published in the United States, where all the information has been digitalized. So it's much easier to analyze. We can use in a more structured model. And it shows that it's possible. It's possible to add information and within AI. This is the project in Spain. How some agents were able to use real-life data but not all are doing it. We also have in literature the use of non-randomized evidence and incorporate certain tools in but it's not applicable. The use of AI, as we talk about real-world data for clinical benefits and probability to use
the use of data, the available data, could estimate the cost of a disease. So many information that we have as we talk in Brazil, we have administrative data that could be added so we can understand better what's the burden of certain disease. We also have to look into the payment. Brigitte maybe can talk better how it works in Canada, but Canada has been doing some projects that reevaluate, reassess the price of certain medications. They monitor this through a specific amount of time, could be 2-3 years, and understand if the benefit of the medication is what was expected. So with that, we can reevaluate and understand the impact on how much it will be paid. Other aspects that is not necessarily connected to HTA is the FDA project, to how to apply automation to follow up adverse events and to gather information, review electronic data, identify adverse effects before a product is released to the market. This is another strategy, but is much more active. And I'll conclude, talk about my experience. How we use this data analysis, something that happened in Brazil, and I was satisfied, and I started to look much more careful this data. Once we do an evaluation in the healthcare, I worked closely with Conitec and many other institutions. So our concerns when it goes to a public consultation, what would be the response? And sometimes we wait, could be 10 or 1,000 comments. We had so many comments, and the amount of information is enormous, and we have to analyze in detail. But something interesting, Jorge Barreto published some studies. After public consultation, we understand the public engagement and how this contribution was done. I have on the screen the name of the software that I won't read for you, but it could codify the information. So we could have a faster conclusion, and we could automate it. I believe this will be an interesting future that will support the process. In 2021, this team published, using the same tool, over 300 texts. And we have so many comments about the guidelines for child labor in normal birth. It was done through machine learning. And in each category, we could evaluate if it was positive or reactive. It was very interesting. This process can be facilitated, and it can be transparent. And we can analyze people opinion and society opinion. There are so many challenges, and I reflect on the use of HTA in some countries. And I believe it also fits our a model in my country. Some data are centralized, not all patients are connected, so collect data, it's limited. It's done by different center, and if we need to start talking between countries, we talk about different vocabulary, different forms to analyze information. There's also cost that we for store data and to use it in research. So we need to invest more in it. There's another aspect that we've been seeing in different moments. There's not enough personnel, people that can understand the language, the AI language and AI methods, and also people that can understand what is the question, what is expected answer, what should be generated. So it's a great number of technical abilities that need to be integrated so we can proceed with it. In Brazil, we are a new generation. We are gathering new scientific evidences, and we have a lot of opportunities to, we also will quantify more and more. This is very positive. We can identify what is the true value to make it sustainable. Challenges, I have mentioned some. I believe we have to invest. We need to invest with personnel, people expert in AI. We need to generate qualified professionals. We also need to define policies and new politics. We need to create Brazilian guides and norms for HTA. And I agree with Brigitte. We also start an initiative. It actually started last year, but it was approved this year. We work with the Ministry of Science and Technology. We are planning on build a center for innovation in AI for health. I work with Antonio Ribeiro, Virgilio, and it's with great satisfaction that I'm part of this group of researchers. We are adding AI to our decision-making process. And I believe we all have to be prepared. We need to identify this process. I conclude thanking researchers that work with me, Miriam, Ricardo, Luciana, Ana Paula, and Carisi. They helped me prepare this material. I make myself available to answer any question.
Carisi, gracias por la presentación. Bueno, básicamente abrimos la posibilidad de hacer comentarios o preguntas. Hay una cajita de preguntas donde se pueden...
Now we have time for Q&A. You can put your questions into the chat or raise your hand, and we'll ask the questions of the speakers. Pedro from Paraguay had some comments to make about studies conducted there. There's another question. Artificial intelligence is used to strengthen the different health technologies currently used. And so my question is, or the question being asked, let me read it to see if I understood the question. It's a comment, sorry. It's not a question. So this comment by Hermes is really about IA coming down to the algorithms. Thank you very much for that comment. There's someone here whose name doesn't appear. It shows as anonymous attendee, referring to current legislation and norms for governing the use of artificial intelligence as to assist health technologies. So this is just a request for what information the speakers would like to provide regarding what the current legal framework is, legislation available to govern this. Let's hear from Brigitte first.
Uy, no, no se escucha, Brigitte.
We can't really hear you. What about now? Well, a little bit better. Not as well as when you actually made the presentation.
Ahora sí.
Ahí sí, ahí sí.
Ok, perfecto. Gracias por esta pregunta. Entonces, sí, el marco legal, por supuesto.
So the legal framework,
Es un desafío de ver primero el uso de inteligencia artificial en
first we have to you see what the use of artificial intelligence in health will be. That's the first challenge, how it's going to be used in devices. In Europe, I don't really have that information in front of me, but this legislation and the legal framework is being brought up to speed quickly. There does have to be an international legal framework governing the use of data. Now, that use can be governed by the country where this data is stored or used. Now, to have larger databases for the purpose or across a number of different clinical research projects in neurology, for example, you have to see first how the data is going to be used and whether that's going to give rise to any type of legal impediment. I can't give you a specific reference, but this is a very active field. And if you were to do a search under Google Scholar, you're going to see many articles written about this. In Quebec, we're talking a lot about the ethical use of artificial intelligence in a health center that we have in Quebec, and that is an ongoing effort.
I would love to say I do have more information, but I don't. We do know of some initiatives here in Brazil, but it really depends on what technology we're talking about. Some related to radiology, for instance, softwares in order to automate certain aspects. They don't go through a formal validation process. New equipment or machinery that are AI based in order to read a certain image, for instance, that doesn't go through a formal assessment and validation process of its algorithm accuracy. On the other hand, there is a lot of debate on the devices and that people are using, and that's of much more concern to me. People say, calculate your cardiovascular risk. They're available, but there is no regulation of those.
As a moderator, I'd like to make a comment. The legal aspects are different depending on the application. In the use of artificial intelligence for a systematic review, there's no legal aspect to be defined. But in the use of artificial intelligence as a technology in itself, and the application of an algorithm to do a screening of diabetic retinopathy, as Brigitte showed us, there are legal aspects that have to do with the approval of a technology for its use. And at some point, they share the problems that the approval of devices has. A new device is a little different from the prior device that was approved. The new device is based on the prior approval, but the new device that is based on the prior approval is really very similar, so you don't need a new assessment, or it's different enough that you need assessment. And that's the issue with the devices. And with algorithms, this happens. There is a new CT scan. The CT scan seems like it's old. Let's use in general as a device that generates images. But there's a new CT scan that looks like the one before, but it incorporates an algorithm. And this new CT scan, when you have to approve it, what is the influence of the algorithm? How should you assess it? And there are legal aspects. Now, in the analysis of large databases of data generated by the wearables or by electronic records, or sometimes data generated by the patients themselves, there's a legal issue in terms of the anonymity of the data, confidentiality of those data, and there are legal aspects there. As a story, maybe many of you know the Apple Watch that allows you to identify some arrhythmias because you can monitor the heart rhythm. And before the Apple Watch came in the market, there were rumors that Apple was interacting with the FDA, and people didn't know why that interaction was taking place. The reason was because they wanted to propose the smartwatch as an intelligent device that would allow you to measure the heart rhythm and diagnose an arrhythmia. It wouldn't be just any watch. So there were legal aspects for the approval of the device. So legal aspects, therefore, are different in terms of the different uses. We continue with a question. Santiago gives us his greetings. Since Wednesday, we've been working together. There's a question by somebody whose name I won't be able to pronounce. It's Dacivi Bryce. And the question has to do about the integration of AI in the healthcare system in general, how to assess its impact, how to convince the decision makers to adapt it. It's a very broad question. AI can be seen as any other technology or any other research line that you see in health systems. I think it's very early to do an impact assessment or convince a decision maker. In the next few years, we will have more information and this dialogue will be more precise. I don't know if Brigitte or Carisi have a different opinion.
As you said, Sebastián, this is a very broad question. We would have to look into each segment to see how AI is advancing. And when it's so wide in scope, it can be paralyzing. For each disease, let's take Brigitte's example here with retinopathy. If we can show that the use of a new device can allow for an earlier diagnosis, especially for more severe patients, and model it, of course, it will be attractive for those who invest in those situations. And in some cases, investing in AI will not bring as high a return as expected. So my suggestion, in order to identify the real value
and attract investment in this sector would be to seek out areas in which AI is already more advanced, is already closer to tangible results.
Brigitte, do you have any question, any comments? It's something that has to do with the type of application, because like Sebastián says, this is very broad. If we look at the impact of AI in a health system, it would be a very broad answer. Personally, I would like to know what all the safety devices are, but if the hospital uses AI to give me an appointment more quickly or to refer me to a specialist based on my dialogue with a chat box, AI will give me an appointment with the specific person, and it has an impact on the quality of life. But at the clinical level, I believe that each application needs to be assessed in economic terms, and it would be broad if we want to look at the impact as a whole. I agree, Brigitte. I continue looking at the questions. Some are comments. Leticia Filler says that there's regulations by Anvisa about the use of softwares and devices. Samira Franca says that WHO in 2021 published guide on ethics and governance for the use of AI in health. Gabriel Jubrensky says that in Argentina, there are also regulations for the assessment of software as a medical device. I made a summary of those who had talked about regulations. Ana Paula is asking whether each country should have their own regulations, or would it be better to have a general regulation? I think that it's not different from other aspects. Countries adapt general regulations to international regulation, be it WHO or regulatory issues that FDA approves, and countries and agencies replicate their approvals, but I don't feel that it would be different or would have a different behavior from other technologies or other regulations of the health system. I don't know if Carisi or Brigitte have a different opinion.
We have seen many situations in which each country develops a process separately, and they end up very similar. So perhaps having a general process and allowing each country to adapt to their national reality would be far more productive. So if we could have more international standards and allow for people to adjust to the local realities, I think it would be more productive.
No, totalmente de acuerdo.
No, I'm in agreement. We have to work on guidelines and policies, make them as international as possible. Then countries will autonomous look at the specificities. Very good. Jeremias Bernal asked a question about deep learning, and I'm going to read it because I don't know if I know enough to interpret. Deep learning is structured with neuronal networks, too many, and to do the first phase in a supervised learning on how to analyze a systematic review. Is this the first phase to be able to assess this new technology? And I understand that by new technology, he's talking about the development of the algorithm. I don't know whether Brigitte, if you understood the question or if you have any idea on how to answer it. I understood that it has to do with tools to assess the process of development of deep learning with a neuronal network that is implicit. And the answer is I don't know. I know there are many tools that are being developed, but once it becomes implicit, the discussion is to make it as explicit as possible, and the implementation and the acceptance by professionals. That's the limit of my knowledge. Thank you, Brigitte. There are questions in the general chat. There are comments, more than questions. Comments can be read in the chat, and I'm not going to read them. There's a question by Felipe Mainca about the investment in professionals with IT capabilities to develop AI. What should universities do? How do public organizations contribute? Do you know in your countries whether there are plans to develop training for people that could work on artificial intelligence?
I can refer to two experiences and two models. In Brazil, we don't have a specialist that is a dual specialty. Perhaps there is a computer scientist who later goes into health. In the United States, there are some initiatives and institutions that are running parallel training programs for those who are in medical school. They call it information technology. I don't know that there is something similar in Brazil. In practical terms, considering the number of people we have both in information technology and in health, I believe we should work together. It is hard to find somebody who will be fully knowledgeable to cover both ends alone. And we need to define the object of study, a database, a process together, including professionals who are experts in each area.
Thank you. Brigitte? Now, at the university level, and I've had some experience adapting our programs at the primary level. In computer science, I think there are many programs that already do work at this level. Now, some universities offer that type of program. Now, the way to work and training in artificial intelligence following the SHUM level, we include clinicians and experts in concrete projects to meet immediate needs And as Carisi said, for interdisciplinary work, we're going to have to get used to a new actor, therapists, nurses, social workers, and computer experts have to be brought on board to understand what our needs are, to listen and be open, and to apply his or her own expertise and to create something entirely new. Thank you. Liz Marino has made a comment saying basically that they are developing software to refer pregnant women to reduce maternal mortality. And so the question then is, do you have any suggestions for this study? It's a very broad question. We're talking about methodological matters of the study. There's not a lot that we could propose just as we're dipping our toes in this, but Liz Marino, I understand, is from Brazil. So perhaps Carisi might have some suggestion for Liz regarding, well, do we have a fully functional software that's ready to use, or will it have to be adapted for its implementation for this type of study?
I must confess, it would be a little bit vague for me to answer this properly. I would need to better understand what is the software and what is the expected results. If it is something being developed within a university, within an academic institution, generally there are forums within those institutions for innovation through which they can contact other partners and facilitators to move it forward. But I will post my email address in the chat.
I hope she's doing all right. I think she just has a cough. I didn't really understand Carisi's response, but I do think that in this type of development, to work with the patient when applying artificial intelligence and regarding the data to be used, from whom and when it can be used. Thank you, Brigitte. I see that Carisi is back and she's safe and sound. I don't know if you want to try that answer again.
Perfecto, Carisi.
No, thank you.
Acá veo que hay dos preguntas más.
We have two more questions. Well, Jeremias is just commenting that he is aware of a program for skin cancer diagnosis, and Ruth Maria is asking whether we will be sent or have access rather to the recording. Yes, that will be made available. One more question just came in from Gabriel, just under the wire. So can artificial intelligence be used for the selection of patients for a study? I'll give you my opinion, and that is yes. The way patients are selected, the example Brigitte gave us, for example, making use of an algorithm to detect, tell the difference between spam or a real email that we want based on all the information that comes in. That same type of algorithm can be used to select patients for a study, assuming that the patients, the universe of patients from which you would like to draw are all cut up in some registry, electronic registry.
Yes, I have actually seen multiple initiatives that use electronic medical records, both searching open fields as well as structured data. I was actually a professor judging a doctor's dissertation. They wanted to check on chronic renal patients who were diabetic that belonged to a certain age group, and the system was actually quite easy to apply. And in very short order, they identified 120 patients that they went after so they could enroll them in the study. So it is possible. At least in Brazil, we have a new law regarding the use of electronic medical record data usage. There must be an ethical standard that has to be followed in order to identify those patients. So there is regulation on these data sources.
Sí. No sé si Brigitte, ¿tienes algún comentario?
Brigitte, do you have any more remarks? Yeah, that was quite a clear response. It is possible. So the big question is, when people went to the hospital where that database was created, did they provide authorization for that information to be used this way? Because if that authorization wasn't given by the patient, it would be unethical for a couple of years later that electronic information to be used in a selection process for some clinical study.
That is something that all hospitals and all of us will have to adapt to. I will give you an example of a public hospital I work in, Hospital de Clínicas. Ahead of this concern, already ask patients whether data contained in their electronic medical record may be accessed in the future for research purposes, and that is already included as a yes or no. And in the future, if I want to research the data, I can only access those records for which the patient approved future searches. But we will only be able to do so if we proactively request that information from patients.
Bueno, creo que no hay más preguntas
I don't think
específicamente.
there are any more specific questions. Now, there's a comment from Jeremias again about how in the Social Security system, Panama, they are planning to develop artificial intelligence for a given application. Now, at the end of each slide, that is on the last slide of each presentation, you'll find the emails of all of the speakers. It's 5 to 6 afternoon, and I don't see any more questions. I thank Brigitte and Carisi for those presentations. This is a very fascinating, compelling topic. Not only because it can be very useful, but it can also spare us from having to do very time-consuming tasks so that we can take more advantage of human intelligence that should be employed on better pursuits. Thank you again. I thank Fran and Malene, RedETSA, Barbara, Banya. The formal closing. Well, thank you very much. I thank you again, Brigitte, Carisi, for your participation. We had more than 170 people listening in at one point in time. That goes to show how much people are interested in this in Brazil and throughout the region. I saw many names I am familiar with, members of the network. This webinar is going to be made available in the 3 languages on the webpage of RedETSA. So on behalf of the Secretariat of RedETSA, I thank you. And I give the floor now to Vania.
I only want to thank everyone for your brilliant presentations and wish you all a wonderful weekend. See you next time.
Placer.
Bueno, espero que anden muy bien y que todos pasen un buen fin de semana. Y bueno, un
I hope
placer.
everyone enjoys their weekend. It's been a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you.
Chao, chao.
Buen fin de semana.